Okay, we're back looking at Blake's London again, but this time we're going to look at structure. So we want to explain today the impact of the simple ABAB rhyme scheme and the structure of Blake's London. Now I think here what we need to start with the point that there's probably very little a poet does by accident. Poems are very short, and whatever choices you make about words or about rhyme are very specific and very direct, and they add to meaning. They don't take away from meaning, especially with someone as talented as Blake or Shelley. They add to the meaning. They add something political sometimes, but definitely they add something creative. And we're going to have a look at what the rhyme scheme tells us extra about the poem London and about what Blake wanted us to understand about it. So firstly, we've got these two words, innocence and experience, almost a proxy for childhood and growing up, a perfect state of the world and an imperfect state of the world. Now this is really important because London actually comes from a set of poems and a book of poems that Blake wrote called Songs of Innocence and Experience. And this is also really important to us structurally because, as you can see, they are songs. They are designed to be sung. And therefore, the fact that this poem, London, is quite simple and also sounds a bit like a nursery rhyme isn't by accident. And it is done to contrast this idea of corruption and tyranny with innocence, the innocence of the nursery rhyme, the innocence of childhood, with the corruption and the despair of adulthood. I'm just going to say innocence versus despair because it's not just experience that Blake highlights in the poem London, but it's also this overwhelming sense of despair and mourning for the loss of something. So it's innocence that he would expect of a nursery rhyme, and there's a real contrast here from the nursery rhyme sing-song sound of the poem to the content of the poem, to highlight how far man has come from nature, how distant we are from where we should be. How far we are from romantic ideals. And this AB rhyme scheme is really nice because it's really simple. This idea of I wandered through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. It's super simple. But just that AB in itself does some really interesting things. So we have this sing-song rhythm. We know that that is done deliberately to contrast with and subvert the nursery rhyme almost, to highlight the despair of adulthood and the despair of reality. But also it's really useful because it creates this kind of rhythm almost like walking, and that's exactly what Blake is doing. He's taking us on a tour of London, a walk around his hometown, and that helps us to experience this journey with him. It becomes far more sensory when we're with him, and I think that really helps in terms of what Blake is trying to do with that poem. He's trying to show us the world he lives in, and he's trying to take us to the place that he wants us to see here. Now, it also, this AB rhyme scheme, forces us to look at a particular group of words, and it emphasizes this idea of flow and woe. We have this idea that this woe is like a flow, it follows the river itself. This kind of despair is perpetual. It is non-stop. And again, we have fear and here, this really sensory kind of emphasis that the rhyme scheme forces. And I think that's really important, is this idea that the rhyme scheme emphasizes certain imagery. When we land on these rhymes, we land on this sense of being able to hear the pain, being able to hear the suffering, being able to hear the impact of the manacles, to hear the impact of the tyranny in London at this time. And again, we land on cry and sigh, and then we land finally at curse and hearse. And we go from these flow of woe all the way down to this kind of final end point, where it's just pain and suffering and eventually death. And that is Blake's warnings, these woes, and this suffering is so pronounced that the end point, unless we change, is going to be death. And so the rhyme itself just really emphasizes how we feel it. We hear it, we sense it. It's almost, again, like we're on this journey, walking with him, and we partake in it. This AB rhyme scheme also kind of emphasizes one thing against another. It's always AB, it's always AB. And so we have this sense of conflict, right? A versus B. A versus B. The whole way through. Just like worker versus company. Radical versus monarchy. That's something that Blake could definitely be utilising here. And then when we talk about this much bigger structure of the poem, we notice that it's in 4 stanzas, 4 quatrains, and they're really tight units. And it's a really strict structure. And why is it such a strict structure? What does that reflect? What is it a manifestation of? I mean, is it a manifestation of the manacles themselves existing in this and imprisoned in this tight structure? So it's a strict structure. Is it a manifestation of the imprisonment of the people of London? You know, even if we just look at it like this, it kind of lines of bars, almost like a prison itself. And so Blake utilises structure and really effectively here to kind of give us this sing-song beauty of a nursery rhyme that he subverts to show us the despair of experience. He uses this A-B sing-song rhythm that almost sounds like footprints and patters of footprints walking around London, so we feel like we're journeying with him. But not only this, he uses this rhyme scheme to emphasise the pain and suffering that we hear and that we know flows through London and we know ends with the hearse. But also this tight structure of 4 quatrains is almost inescapable itself. He doesn't allow himself any wobbles. He doesn't allow himself any breathing room like Shelley does when he's using this sort of slightly different sonnet form, not quite Petrarchan, not quite Shakespeare. He does his own thing. Blake does the opposite. He exists within a tight structure. And is that to emphasise the imprisonment of the people of London in their mind-forged manacles by the City of London Corporation, by King George III, by the suffering of capitalism, and by the fact that man has moved too far away from nature.